The United States just did something unbelievable. Treasury official Scott Bessent stood on live TV and told the entire world, if you buy oil from Russia through China, we'll hit you with a 100% tariff. Not just China. He threatened India, Germany, even America's own allies in the G7. The US is now demanding that other countries stop doing business with nations it can't control, and if they don't, they get punished. It sounds like a joke, but it's real. Bessent is turning trade into a global loyalty test. While Scott Bessent was threatening the world with tariffs, China responded with megawatts, not panic. Beijing didn't hold a press conference. It simply switched on 5 massive hydroelectric dams in Tibet, blasting over 300 billion megawatt-hours into its grid. That's more clean energy than all of Poland combined, from just one project. Meanwhile, the United States hasn't built anything close to this in years. No new megadams, no national infrastructure breakthrough, just more sanctions, more paperwork, and more threats. If Bessent's plan was to choke China's energy supply by cutting off Russian oil, this move from Beijing completely shatters that strategy. China is not in crisis. It is an energy superpower, powered by water, solar, and scale that the US simply can't disrupt. The timing was no accident. It was a direct message. You cannot cut us off from power, because we're building it ourselves. With one flip of the switch, China silenced the narrative that it was vulnerable. The US tried to pressure the world with trade threats. China answered with infrastructure and electricity. And that, right there, is what's shaking Washington to its core. Before we get deep into the story, ensure you are subscribed for the best analysis and news breakdown. Let's start by exposing what the US plan is. Bessent's playbook is to enforce US economic dominance through tariffs. The tariffs are not the aim. They are just tools to force countries to keep bowing to the demands of the US. Think about the relationship between Canada and the US. These are two countries with extremely close ties. Yet Trump has been hard on Canada with tariffs, showing that it was never really about the tariffs but control. He slapped 30% tariffs on Chinese imports, which Beijing answered with 10% taxes on US goods. Then Bessent escalated, proposing 100% secondary tariffs on any country that dares purchase Russian or Iranian oil. Behind this threat lies the intention to constrict China's access to vital energy channels, effectively turning oil into a weapon. On July 22nd in Stockholm, Bessent met his Chinese counterpart to discuss extending the trade deadline, hinting at the deepening US pressure campaign. He's not just negotiating trade, he's demanding obedience. China must bow to US conditions or face unrelenting punishment. Amid all this, we need a reality check. US tariffs may line government coffers with billions and create pressure, but they are already backfiring. American exporters face a collapse. From May 2024 to May 2025, US exports to China plunged 18%, which is the sharpest drop since COVID disruptions in 2020. This is a staggering drop that signals real economic pain in Washington's own backyard. At the same time, even after incurring heavy tariffs on imported goods, US consumers remain the ones paying the bill. As always, the burden lands squarely on their wallets. Washington may claim victory, but the casualties are American. Echoing this, Bessent's pivot to secondary tariffs implies a worldwide squeeze. Yet global economies may not be so eager to oblige. For decades, China relied on energy imports from Iran and Russia. It remains the largest buyer of Iranian oil and the second largest purchaser of Russian crude. The dollar's dominance in oil markets has been America's trump card. Until now. With Bessent threatening secondary tariffs, he's signaling a move to weaponize energy access. But this is high-stakes poker. If China refuses, the US risks disrupting global oil markets, forcing countries to seek alternatives outside the dollar system. Pressuring India, Turkey, or even BRICS neighbors to comply opens cracks in the global order, potentially pushing more states toward parallel financial networks. This short-sighted tactic risks accelerating the very shift away from US hegemony it tries to prevent. Europe has its own problems. Its exports to the US are massive. Over $130 billion in pharmaceuticals and metals, and $67 billion in autos and car parts. for a total that dwarfs American exports to Europe. With Bessent calling on the EU to join the containment of China or face 30% US tariffs, Brussels finds itself caught between Washington's demands and its own industrial security. Europe must ask, are US headlines more important than its factories and jobs? Now let's talk about how China rendered US warnings ineffective in the most intimidating way. China's decision in July to begin construction on the world's largest hydropower project, the Yarlung Zangbo, or Medog Hydropower Station in Tibet, is not just another engineering milestone. This project is so massive and so significant that it is already causing tensions internationally. When finished, it will produce about 300 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity each year. That is 3 times more than the famous Three Gorges Dam, which was once the world's largest. This is enough electricity to power an entire country like the United Kingdom. This project shows how far China has come. While other countries are still planning and arguing, China is building. And it is not building small, it is building big. The Yarlung Zangbo Dam will use 5 separate dams and powerful tunnels to capture the power of the river. The cost of the whole project is estimated at around 1.2 trillion Chinese yuan. That is about 168 billion US dollars. The project is expected to be finished in the early 2030s. Meanwhile, the United States has not built anything like this in recent years. The last big dam built in the US was many decades ago. The Grand Coulee Dam, which is the largest in the US, produces only about 6 gigawatts of electricity. That is 10 times less than what China's new dam will produce. The US government has passed large infrastructure bills, but none of them include any new dams or power projects of this size. This makes China's new dam project look even more impressive. China is showing that it is serious about clean energy and big construction. The United States, on the other hand, keeps talking about climate change and energy independence but is not building anything close to what China is building. This is not just about electricity. This is also about power and influence. The Yarlung Zangbo River flows into India and Bangladesh. By building this dam, China will have more control over how much water flows downstream. Even though China says the dam will not block or reduce water to other countries, India and Bangladesh are still worried. They know that whoever controls the river can affect farming, fishing, and daily life. India has already expressed concern to China about this project. Indian officials worry that the dam could one day be used to hold back water or cause floods. China insists that the project is for clean energy only and will not hurt other countries. But many people in the region are still nervous. They know that water can be used as a political tool, and they do not want to be at the mercy of China. China is shaping the future with concrete and steel. Meanwhile, the US hesitates. American leaders like to say that the US is still the leader of the free world, but when it comes to big energy projects, it is clearly falling behind. This became clear again in June 2025. After some military action by Israel and the US against Iran, the Iranian parliament voted to block the Strait of Hormuz. This is a narrow sea route where 20% of the world's oil passes through. If Iran had followed through, oil prices could have gone through the roof. The US was worried. It needed a way to keep oil flowing and prices down. Then something surprising happened. President Donald Trump told China that it could continue buying oil from Iran. In fact, he asked China to buy even more oil. He hoped that if China kept buying from both Iran and the US, it would calm Iran down and stop the situation from getting worse. This was a big moment. Just a few years ago, the US was trying to cut Iran's oil sales to zero. Now it was asking China to keep buying Iranian oil to help stop a global crisis. This showed how much the US now depends on China to keep the world economy stable. China did not respond with speeches or threats. It just kept buying oil, mostly through small private refineries known as teapots. These refineries helped China buy over 1.8 million barrels of oil per day from Iran in June 2025 alone. This helped lower global oil prices by about 6% in just one day. China's actions had a bigger effect than any US military move or diplomatic speech. This was a turning point. It was clear that the US was no longer the only country that could control global energy markets. China was now playing a leading role, not by using force, but by using its huge market power. It was also doing it quietly, without drama. While Trump tried to look strong, his actions showed that the US needed China more than China needed the US. He wanted China to buy oil from both sides to prevent Iran from closing the strait. This was not a show of power, it was a show of weakness. China was the stabilizer, the buyer, the calm force. The US was worried and reactive. At the same time, China's giant dam project continued without delay. The American response was just more words. Statements from the Treasury, warnings from officials like Scott Bessent, and vague threats that had no real weight. Scott Bessent, a key figure in Trump's Treasury Department, warned China about buying oil from Russia and Iran, and about building the dam. He said China would face consequences, but China kept building. It kept buying oil. It ignored the threats because there were no real actions behind them. Bessent's threats were empty. China had already figured out how to avoid US sanctions. It used private ships, small refineries, and third-party trade networks. It also knew that the US could not afford to punish China too harshly without hurting its own economy. The US was trapped. It needed China's help to keep oil prices low, and it had no way to stop the dam project. In global markets, it became obvious who had the upper hand. China was the one that triggered stock market rallies when it announced new energy projects. Chinese infrastructure news made global construction and steel companies rise in value. The US could no longer move the markets in the same way. It had lost that ability. This shift in power is not about military strength. The US still spends more on defense than any other country. But that money does not build dams. It does not create energy. It does not shape rivers or markets. China is now doing all of those things. It is building the future, not just talking about it. The Yarlung Zangbo Dam is not just a Chinese project. It is a symbol of a new world where China leads by building. It shows that China can create real things that last for decades. It shows that China can plan long-term and take bold steps. The US is stuck reminiscing about past achievements, while China is already building what's next. China's rise is not just about its economy. It is also about its role in global stability. When Trump needed someone to calm down Iran, he turned to China. When oil markets got shaky, China's quiet buying brought prices back down. When the world needed infrastructure, China was already building it. This is the new reality. The world economy is no longer centered solely on Washington. It's shifting toward Beijing. And unless the US changes course, starts building, and takes bold action like it once did, it will keep falling behind. The rest of the world sees it. China isn't just catching up, it's pulling ahead. Is this the rise of a new global power and the end of America's economic dominance? If you want to stay ahead of this shift, make sure you're subscribed. This story is just getting started.